الهجوم الإسرائيلي
The Israeli attack that took place today on Qatari soil can only be described as state terrorism carried out by someone like Netanyahu.
Unprecedented attack. Israel targets Hamas's leadership in Qatar, with Doha calling it a flagrant violation of international law. U.S. President Donald Trump says he's very unhappy about the strike. A judge has temporarily blocked Trump from removing Fed Governor Lisa Cook, allowing her to remain on the job. And fresh tariff threats. Trump is said to be willing to impose new tariffs on India and China to push Russia into negotiations with Ukraine. It's just gone 8 a.m. across the Emirates. I'm Johannesburg in Dubai. Well, our top story this morning from the region, an unprecedented attack on Doha in the late afternoon yesterday, carried out by Israel, targeting key Hamas officials. What happens next? Very strong condemnation coming through from Qatari leadership, in addition to other Arab states and from other voices around the world. We will be discussing this story at length throughout the course of this show, especially on what happens next. But as for markets, what we saw yesterday was another record high for the S&P. Today, this morning, futures leaning towards the green as well, up 0.2%. All eyes, as we've been talking about, is going to be on that inflation data that's coming on Thursday, as the market continues to price in a more aggressive Fed easing cycle. 3 rate cuts priced in by the end of this year. 10-year yields moved a little bit higher yesterday, so we moved a couple of basis points higher throughout the course of the day. Of note, the downward revisions to the jobs growth data, a downward revision of more than 900,000 for 2025. So really speaks to some of the weakness that's propping up in the labor market. USD slipping a little bit this morning, and then Brent taking note, of course, of the geopolitical developments in this part of the world. We are up 0.9% this morning. But the news doesn't stop there. We also had some developments out of France, with the President Macron appointing a new prime minister. Fairly quick turnaround of events there. And also, as well, we've been talking about the market impact that all of these political developments in France have been having on OATs. Yesterday, OAT, 10-year OATs, pretty much converged with 10-year BTPs, which is a lower-rated sovereign credit. So quite a remarkable development there, in the sense that investors are shying away from buying and holding on to these 10-year French bonds in anticipation of further fiscal slippage. So that is a big topic of conversation in Europe. We'll talk more about that later on the show as well. Okay, let's check in on how markets in Asia are faring. David Inglis joins us from Hong Kong. And David, one thing I forgot to mention in my recap, of course, was the Apple effect. And we've seen a bit of a muted reaction in that stock in after hours. How are things playing out in Asia this morning?
Yeah, you know what? We were actually looking at the Apple effect, because certainly there is a key element of the supply chain in the Asia-Pacific, and certainly in terms of index constituency, that does tend to move more often than not. In today's case, though, it's still in tech, still in hardware, by the way, but it's not so much the Apple story that's really playing out. But again, as we were pointing out, right, the Oracle story from overnight on cloud revenue really giving the AI bulls more to run with, really. And you can see that with TSMC. Alibaba, of course, is separate, but that's also now an Alibaba play. We closed 2% higher in the morning session. We were up as much as over 3% at one point, so we did come off highs, 4-year highs on that stock itself. The other thing we're tracking is CATL. That's the big lithium producer in China, and reports there that it might be able to get one of its mines back online earlier. More supply coming to the market. Lithium plays are actually to the downside. Right. Back to the tech theme, though, as Joanna, you were pointing out, and let me take an equity overlay on the fixed income story. There is an equity case to be made, really, when you look at many of the benchmarks in the region here. I'll get to the benchmark in a moment, but the Kospi index, case in point, 2 more hours of trade, and if things stay the way they're trading at the moment, we're set for a record close on that specific benchmark. The Hang Seng Tech, of course, which is indicative of this flow of money going into tech plays. We're now looking at 9 days of inflows coming into this. Now, on the note I was just making on the Asia-Pacific benchmark, record in Korea, I'll end on this. We're a good day away from taking out the 2021 peak on the Asia-Pacific benchmark, which means by the weekend, if things continue, we could actually see a fresh record high on Asia-Pacific. I'll leave you with that fairly optimistic note at this point in time. Back to you.
We need a bit of optimism in these times. David Inglis in Hong Kong, thank you so much. Israel has conducted an unprecedented strike against senior Hamas leaders in the Qatari capital, Doha. It is a move that is widely seen as escalating an already tense standoff between the country and Arab nations over its war in Gaza. This attack against Hamas in Qatar also drew rare public criticism from the U.S. President Donald Trump, who said he learned of the attack too late to stop it.
I'm not thrilled about the whole situation. It's not a good situation. But I will say this, we want the hostages back, but we are not thrilled about the way that went down today.
Did they notify you in advance, Mr. President? Did Israel tell you in advance?
No.
So you were caught by surprise, sir?
I'm never surprised by anything, especially when it comes to the Middle East.
A rebuke of sorts coming through from President Trump there. The White House to release a full statement later today on the developments in Qatar. Let's go to Jerusalem now and speak to Bloomberg's Dan Williams. An unprecedented attack, very strong words coming through from the Qatari Prime Minister late last night. He called it an attack of state terror. Dan, what has been the reaction specifically within Israel, especially the families of those hostages still held in captivity, and from the broader Middle East region?
This attack, indeed, unprecedented in terms of the site, not operationally. It's worth remembering that Israel has carried out a number of decapitation strikes against its enemies on the various fronts of this war, this almost two-year-old war. We saw that repeatedly in the Gaza Strip. We saw it in Lebanon with Hezbollah of the summer of 2024, and we saw it this summer in Iran. This would not in itself be unusual. What's unusual, as you noted, is the site, Qatar, a U.S. ally. And I think it's fair to say that there's a great deal of indecision in Israel as to what this all means. First of all, because it's not at all clear that this attack was a success on Israel's terms. It may have targeted the leadership of Hamas abroad. It's not clear that it got the people it was meant to get, that the people meant to have been killed were indeed killed. In fact, that's been denied by Hamas. And as you noted, this war is almost 2 years old. 48 hostages remain, 20 of them alive. And there's a great deal of concern that this will distance any prospect of a safe return of those 20 live hostages and a resolution of this war in a manner that many Israelis would consider satisfactory. In fact, some have worried that Hamas may retaliate by executing some of those hostages. Throughout the war, there have been at times threats by Hamas to execute them. So right now, I think the Israelis are waiting to see, A, what indeed were the results of the strike, B, where do things really stand with the United States, whether it really was blindsided by this, or whether a transactional Trump presidency will be happier if it finds out that the strike was a success and contributes to the end of the war. That's the argument that the Prime Minister here, Netanyahu, made last night, that a successful removal of the Hamas leadership would bring a successful end to the war. In fact, peace in Gaza closer. And third of all, what this means for prospects of recovering those hostages alive and well, at least those believed to have survived so far.
Dan, thank you very much. We're going to pick up the conversation. Bloomberg's Dan Williams in Jerusalem. Let's now bring in William Roebuck, Executive Vice President at the Arab Gulf States Institute and former U.S. Ambassador to Bahrain. I want to pick up on what my colleague Dan was referring to, particularly the hopes of a breakthrough on the U.S. ceasefire proposal that was put forward last week. We understand that Steve Witkoff himself actually presented it to Doha, to the mediators in Doha. What hope is there of a breakthrough when both the negotiating team and the country that is hosting the mediation talks have been targeted?
It's a good question. I think right now there's very little hope. I mean, in the short term, just a few hours ago, I understand the Qataris have informed the U.S. administration that they are temporarily putting their mediation efforts on hold. They've done that before when there's been an incident of some kind. This is a much more serious incident from their perspective. But let's see what it looks like in a few days or a week. My assessment is that they will eventually be willing to continue playing the mediation role that they and the Egyptians have played in the past in this conflict. We'll see. But right now, the situation is running hot. The feelings in Doha and in other Gulf and broader Arab capitals is quite heated. Deep condemnation of what Israel has done. So I don't see prospects for the negotiations to start up again. And I also, on the Israeli side, just assessing the way they have responded to the negotiation proposal, I don't see a lot of strong interest on their side yet in that proposal from President Trump.
Yesterday, the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu made some comments. I believe he was at the U.S. Embassy, and he said that they had actually agreed to the terms of the U.S. ceasefire proposal. What do you think Hamas do from here? Also, with the knowledge that Israel unsuccessfully tried to take out Khalil al-Hayya, the chief negotiator for Hamas, who was in Doha at the time yesterday. Hamas are very much fighting an existential fight of existence within Gaza as the Gaza offensive continues and as international condemnation on Israel and on the war, which is going on for 2 years, keeps piling. What do you think they do from here with their backs up against the wall?
They definitely want a ceasefire. They want to get eventually, as a part of that ceasefire negotiation, get the Israeli troops out of Gaza. So they have a strong interest in seeing these negotiations move forward. I think in a few days, in the short term, a few days to a week, you will begin to see some signs of renewed interest on their side and on the mediator's side, the U.S. side, to restart these efforts. We'll see where it goes, but I think they have a strong interest in seeing the negotiations move forward. They want a ceasefire. They're clearly, I think, disturbed by these attacks on them, but they have a long history of having been attacked, and I don't think that's going to dissuade them from engaging in these negotiations.
I think it was about 10 days ago where the Israeli military chief had warned that they would go after Hamas officials everywhere, not specific to within Palestinian territories. And perhaps that warning wasn't heeded seriously enough. But this is part and parcel of a series of more perhaps brazen actions taken by Israel. In this case, and in Doha, but a couple of weeks ago, they assassinated the Houthi prime minister, turning a lot more forthright with some of their actions, taking down their adversaries in the region. Where is the U.S. in all of this? Because the U.S. were apparently given a heads up that this attack was going to take place, but it was too late for them to do anything.
Right. I think, I mean, the information is a bit conflicting about how much of a heads up the United States got. Apparently, the U.S. military got some indications and relayed it to the White House, but it was too late to have any impact. The bombs were already dropping. I think the United States is a strong ally with Israel. They're going to be supportive of Israel's efforts to defend themselves. They're going to also try to protect wider U.S. interests in the region. I think that's why you saw President Trump, in a relatively nuanced way, in his own way, convey some unhappiness with Israel, because he thinks, I believe, that this is disruptive of the process and it's disruptive of an initiative he supported for negotiations. So we'll see how things go moving forward. I think he will maybe take the Qataris' position for a few days and then begin a push again to see if they can get these things back on track.
What do you think this does to GCC relations with the U.S.? And for the better part of the last 4 or 5 decades, there's been an implicit pact between these nations and the U.S., petrodollars in exchange for security guarantees. Where were the security guarantees? They did not stand up and were not proven to be resilient or even present over the course of the last couple of months. What does this do to the relationship between GCC Gulf nations and the United States here?
I think there are some questions. I mean, this is not the first time. Of course, the circumstances on this attack yesterday were special in that the U.S. really didn't have, as far as we know, advance warning. But there have been other attacks. There was an attack on Saudi oil facilities a few years ago, and the U.S. did not respond. So there is some nervousness, I think, in Gulf capitals about security guarantees or just a sense of security that the United States provides with its presence in a lot of these countries. It has military presence in these many of these countries, and the implicit bargain is that in exchange for the presence, they keep these countries more secure. I think they're, as I said, I think they're nervous and concerned, and I think they will be talking to American officials and trying to get some reassurance that these types of actions in the future that the U.S. will push back more strongly to try to prevent them from being attacked in this way and to protect them.
Yeah. William Roebuck, thank you so much for joining us today, Executive Vice President at the Arab Gulf States Institute and former U.S. Ambassador to Bahrain. Thank you. Well, still ahead, we speak with Julius Baer's Yves Bonzon as geopolitical risks from France to the Middle East weigh on markets. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Johanna Bersachi in Dubai. A judge has temporarily blocked President Donald Trump from removing Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook. The decision allows her to remain on the job as she challenges the president's efforts to oust her over allegations of mortgage fraud. Joining us now is Yves Bonzon, Julius Baer CIO, to discuss so many things that are going on around the world. Maybe actually let's just start with this Lisa Cook story, because a couple of weeks ago there was a lot of concern in the market about the Trump administration's interference with the Feds. And now the institutional framework seems to be holding up, a judge temporarily ruling that Trump cannot actually fire Lisa Cook. Should this have any knock-on effects on markets, investors, how they perceive U.S. risk here?
I don't think it does in the short term, but I think this chapter is part of a much bigger story, which is the erosion in the trust in the integrity of U.S. capital markets, who historically have been the gold standard of rule of law application and guarantees for investor of fair treatments and a balance in the system. So I think that erosion of the institutional pillar is an ongoing process, will continue, and that has important consequences, you know, one of which is investors' relative preference, for instance, for credit relative to treasuries.
Yeah. So do you think that that is actually going to have a long-term effect on U.S. financial assets as this process continues to unfold in coming years?
Oh, absolutely. And the main victim is likely to be the U.S. dollar, as we've seen this year. That's the prime target when it comes to the adjustment variable.
When your investors are looking to buy U.S. equities, are they looking to hedge out the dollar exposure then? Because, you know, it's almost like you've got two stories in the U.S. right now. You've got AI, and anything to do with AI seems to be doing very well, but then you have a very weak USD. What are you advising your clients if they want to get exposure?
What we've tried to do this year is actually to keep our U.S. allocation focused on what is truly exceptional to the U.S. And obviously the AI cycle immediately comes to mind. Because actually, if you look at the structure of the U.S. markets, there are plenty of assets in the U.S. where you find substitutes in markets abroad that better diversify your portfolio. So our advice to our clients has been to actually focus U.S. allocation on what's truly unique to the United States.
The U.S. data is very obviously slowing down, and we had those huge downward revisions to jobs growth yesterday, really significant, 911,000 fewer jobs than we thought throughout the course of 2025 by the BLS. How much of a slowdown are you expecting? What is the House view? Is this a recession, or is it just a mild slowdown?
At this stage, we believe it's still a mid-cycle slowdown. And you have a sort of two-tier economy right now because you have everything slowing down except, again, technology, AI. We see a record contribution from infrastructure building, data centers at the forefront. So you have this tension in the U.S. cycle. And when it comes to the consequences for Fed and monetary policy, you wonder the extent to which there's urgency to cut rates. Because if you look at market-based signals, whether it's credit spread, whether it's the S&P 500, the case for rate cuts is actually not that straightforward.
So you're not in the 50 jumbo cut camp?
For
then?
sure not.
Okay.
For sure not. Rather than 25 and let's watch the data and proceed FOMC by FOMC.
Okay. So that's the U.S. I want to park that for a moment because I also want to talk about Europe and everything that's been happening in France. And there's something interesting. You've got the pressure on French spreads, but at the same time, the euro keeps climbing higher. It's almost as though the rest of the Eurozone as a whole has been completely dissociated from everything that's happening within France.
Yeah,
is that valid?
That's true. And to some extent, I would argue the situation in France is not a concern until it is a concern, you know. And I think...
But we're there now, though.
Yeah, well, that's where we are. But, I mean, at some point, the market may realize, if you look at the G7 currencies, you know, there's not really a strong case for one against the other. All these countries in the Western world have become addicted to fiscal deficits. Briefly, at the beginning of the year, the U.S. administration, when they took office, was arguing that the U.S. economy had become addicted to fiscal stimulus and was in urgent need of a so-called fiscal detox. They quickly abandoned the idea.
No one talks about Doge anymore.
No, absolutely. It's history.
Yeah.
And we have the same situation in Europe. As far as French government bonds are concerned, you know, the maturity profile of the French debt is such that there's no immediate concern in terms of rolling over that debt. But certainly the political situation is such that there will continue to be these tensions building. And so do you really want to trade the dollar for euros? I would challenge that. I think investor, irrespective of whether they're euro-based or dollar-based, they need to protect against fiat currency debasement, and that involves focusing fixed income allocations on the highest yielding segments, as well as emphasizing real or semi-real assets.
Yeah. What about the selective equity performance in European markets this year? Defense stocks have had a great run. Financials have also had a great run. Do you get the sense that your clients think that this momentum can continue, or have those trades fully run their course now?
I think these trades are probably due for a pause. Banks and defense are a different story.
Yeah.
I mean, the broader story of European equities as an asset class is an asset class where the pricing structure 18, 24 months ago was one of a bond of an equity market underpinning a regions in lingering disinflation, borderline deflation, sort of Japanification in a nutshell of the region. The U-turn on fiscal policy and government spending by Germany has completely redistributed the cards. And bond-like equities, which were the place where investors were hiding in European equities, because there was hardly any flow into the asset class. And those who have to have an allocation to European equities were hiding in these bond-like type of very high dividends, high quality balance sheet, you know, high return on capital, very defensive type of names. And actually, the whole trade into defense and banks, driven by completely different drivers, but has been to a large extent funded primarily by rotation. That's why we've seen this massive derating of the quality stocks in Europe. And we've seen an unprecedented divergence in growth versus value. Growth has continued to significantly outperform in the US, whereas the exact opposite has happened in Europe.
Yeah.
So I think that trade is quite mature. There might be a pause. And the next steps, as far as banks are concerned, is AI implication on the cost-income ratio of the banking sector.
Yeah. So interesting, and big themes that we can pick up the next time. Yves Bonzon, Julius Baer CIO, with us. Now, Poland has scrambled military jets and shut a major airport in its capital as it engaged Russian strike drones that it says have repeatedly violated its airspace. The military says an operation is underway to identify and neutralize the objects and urge residents to stay at home. The U.S. Federal Aviation Administration says Warsaw's international airport has been closed due to unplanned military activity. And coming up, we discuss tech and the AI boom that's fueling a rally in Asia with our next guest. Also, a deeper dive into Apple results. This is Bloomberg. Good morning. This is Horizon's Middle East and Africa. Our top stories this morning. Unprecedented attack. Israel targets Hamas's leadership in Qatar, with Doha calling it a flagrant violation of international law. U.S. President Donald Trump says he's very unhappy about the strike. A judge has temporarily blocked Trump from removing Fed Governor Lisa Cook, allowing her to remain on the job. And fresh tariff threats. Trump is said to be willing to impose new tariffs on India and China to push Russia into negotiations with Ukraine. Well, it's just gone 8:30 a.m. across the Emirates. I'm Johanna Bersace in Dubai. Geopolitical premium being priced in, at least into oil markets. Not so much the case for U.S. equity markets. Wall Street inching closer once again, another record high. And of course, attention now turns to that inflation data that's coming through on Thursday as the market continues to price in a more aggressive Fed easing cycle. 3 rate cuts priced in for this year. 10-year yields, we moved a couple of basis points higher yesterday. Of note, the BLS downward revision to jobs, 911,000 lower throughout the course of 2025, speaking to weakness of the U.S. labor market here. USD slipping a little bit today in trade, down 7 basis points, a continuation of that theme. The greenback is getting sold. And then, of course, Brent is up 0.9% today as we speak about the unprecedented attack on Doha last night by Israel. No impact, of course, on oil or energy infrastructure, but just elevates some of the geopolitical risks coming out of the region. We'll recap that story in a short moment. I also want to turn to the political developments in France and the fact that President Macron has actually appointed a new prime minister. But of note yesterday as well is you had 10-year OATs, those are French bond yields, almost converge with 10-year BTPs. So those are Italian yields. Even though Italy is rated lower as a sovereign credit, we are now seeing convergence of those spreads, which tells you that investors have been shying away from buying French fixed income because of concerns about the fiscal outlook. So very notable there as well, and a key metric that European fixed income watchers have been looking at. Now, back to our top story for today. A dangerous escalation in an already volatile Middle East. Israel has struck Qatar's capital, Doha, targeting leaders of Hamas, and what marks a significant escalation in the regional conflict. But Qatar's Al Jazeera is reporting Hamas leaders, headed by Khalil al-Hayya, have survived the attack. This unprecedented attack on a U.S. ally sent shockwaves through the region, and it's likely to further anger Arab nations.
The Israeli attack that took place today on Qatari soil can only be described as state terrorism carried out by someone like Netanyahu, within the context of these systematic policies and his ongoing attempts to destabilize regional security and stability. This is a clear message to the entire region. The message says there is a rogue player in this region, ongoing political recklessness, and violations of state sovereignty. Netanyahu himself declared he wanted to reshape the Middle East. Is this his message, that he intends to reshape the Gulf as well?
I convened the heads of Israel's security organizations and authorized a surgical precision strike on the terrorist chiefs of Hamas. Israel acted wholly independently, and we take full responsibility for this action. And this action can open the door to an end of the war.
Major development in the Middle East in the last 24 hours, the condemnations coming through from many Arab states as well. Big questions remain as to what happens with those mediation efforts and whether there can actually be progress on the ceasefire proposal that the U.S. put forward a week ago. So some of the big lingering questions over here in the region. Now let's turn to the tech space. Apple fell after debuting the latest versions of its iPhone, Watch, and AirPods in California on Tuesday. That's as analysts saw no major surprises from the event. The tech giant has introduced its thinnest ever iPhone and new Pro versions with enhanced cameras and more battery life. Bloomberg tech anchor Ed Ludlow has more.
The iPhone 17 Air, the ultra-thin variant of the latest generation handset, represents the most substantive hardware innovation that we've seen from Apple on the iPhone for some time. Then very quickly, the conversation looks to pricing. The base model 17, $799, the Air, $999, and then the Pro, $1,099, $100 higher than its prior generation counterpart, but with a starting price that represents twice the storage. And there was a lot of focus on what Apple would or wouldn't do with pricing, with the backdrops of higher tariffs, costs in supply chain, and a lot of pressure on Apple CEO Tim Cook from this administration to ensure more of the supply chain in the United States. That's just one factor. The timing's also interesting. We're right in the middle of the fiscal fourth quarter for Apple, and these handsets will go on sale within that period. But next quarter is the holiday season. Is the capability of the iPhone 17 generation, particularly at the Pro and Pro Max end, enough to drive sales? Perhaps some of the biggest surprises came very early on in the presentation. We saw the stock pair most of its declines briefly turn positive as they demonstrated AirPods Pro 3. Simultaneous translation. That got the market moving and talking. Interesting because it's an area of technology that Apple might be actually a slow mover in. Meta has already looked at simultaneous translation through the partnership with Ray-Ban and smart glasses. You saw other OEMs like Google focus on simultaneous translation earlier in the year. It was really fascinating to see names like Duolingo have their shares fall rapidly and sharply as that news unfolded. It gives you a sense of the new areas that Apple wants to push into, similarly with health tech.
Well, joining us now to discuss more is Nirgunan Tiruchelvam, head of consumer and internet at Aletheia Capital. Really good to have you with us on the show. Look, it's always exciting. These Apple reveals are always fun, from a consumer standpoint. But the reaction in after hours was pretty underwhelming. The stock was down 1.5%. What is your read across how impactful the new product launch was yesterday out of Apple?
You need to look at it from a broader perspective, Jumana. There are two things about the launch which are very appropriate for our understanding of e-commerce and fintech. One is relative price stability. There's been lots of speculation about the entire smartphone industry, about how the tariffs are going to affect the pricing of this product, but it appears that there is a modicum of price stability. The second factor is that there seems to be stronger moves to integrate the smartphone universe with fintech, and that's a very important factor as we look at the impact of these developments on fintech and e-commerce.
So let me pick you up on the first point regarding pricing and the fact that there wasn't a significant price increase for the latest Pro model. Does that set the tone for other companies in this space as well, for other consumer electronics? If iPhone prices are not going up, what does that mean for the broader ecosystem?
It would certainly mean that emerging markets would remain at the fulcrum of the growth of fintech and e-commerce. Let's take fintech, for example. Over the last 5 years, the growth in TPV in emerging markets has been 29%. This is more than twice what it has been in developed markets. So lots of the things that we take for granted in emerging markets are actually not available in places like Australia, Canada, and the US. For example, here in Singapore, because of the wide availability of iPhones, as well as the integration with the fintech universe, you can pay, let's say, a gig worker like a plumber using something like Pay Now. This sort of convenience is not available in some of the advanced markets. So you could continue to see, with these developments in the smartphone industry, continuing growth in emerging market fintech developments.
What about Apple's role in the AI space? I mean, they seem to be focused a lot more on product development and AI applications as opposed to coming up with innovative or innovations in artificial intelligence. What do you think investors' takeaway is from all of that in terms of Apple and its relative standing amongst the other big mega cap stocks in the US right now in AI?
We are still at the very early stages of the AI investment cycle. It's only been 3 years since the launch of ChatGPT. Many of the tech majors are at varying stages in their investment cycle for this life-changing investment theme, so to speak. Hence, it's very difficult for us to put our finger on which one of the players is on the right track. But you need to identify larger themes that would benefit from AI. Fintech and e-commerce are becoming much more accessible. And what we see among some of the players in this sphere, among our coverage, is that AI will significantly reduce the operating expenses, and that would lead to efficiency gains.
Yeah. How do you see the opportunity set specifically in Asia? Big theme for my colleagues out in Asia has been talking about the competition, the heavy competition in China amongst some of these e-commerce firms. But at the same time, you had the huge outperformance of Alibaba over the last week. So how are you picking winners when it comes to Asian tech and e-commerce firms?
You need to look at 3 factors. First, you need to zone in on which one of these players has a window of opportunity from their free cash flow generation. To what extent are they going to continue to generate free cash flow, which is a vital variable in this industry? The second, you need to look at the degree to which they're integrated with the other services that are associated with the tech, the consumer tech universe, so to speak. So the apps which are integrated that have claims to be super apps would probably outperform the rest. And finally, you need to look at the user base. To what extent are the young consumers gravitating towards the winners? That is a vital indicator of the sustainability of these platforms.
Yeah, so interesting. Thank you for breaking it down for us. Nirgunan Tiruchelvam, head of consumer and internet at Aletheia Capital. Thanks. Now for a look at some of the other stories we're following today. Iran and the International Atomic Energy Agency have signed an agreement to pave the way for resuming cooperation, including efforts to relaunch inspections of Iran's nuclear facilities. The announcement followed a meeting in Cairo amongst the Egyptian Foreign Minister Badr Abdelati and his Iranian counterpart Abbas Araghchi and the agency's Director General Rafael Grossi. Grossi described the agreement as a step in the right direction. And coming up, the bets on Dubai continue. We get the details of an investment into platform Property Finder next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Jumana Bersachi in Dubai. The bets on Dubai continue. Permira and Blackstone have invested $525 million in real estate platform Property Finder. The private capital firms have acquired a minority stake, with this transaction marking Permira's first investment in the Middle East. Meanwhile, General Atlantic, which invested in Property Finder in 2018, sold part of its holding, not all of it. For more on this, we're joined by Bloomberg's Nicolas Parisi. So interesting to see, well, first of all, Permira, its first investment into the region, alongside Blackstone, General Atlantic holding onto their position in Property Finder, but significant also in terms of scale. It's quite a big deal.
In many ways, it's a significant deal. It's sizable indeed. I mean, Property Finder was this company founded about 2 decades ago when Dubai first opened its real estate market to foreign investors. It's one of those homegrown successes that are increasingly attracting foreign capital. So from that perspective, it's an interesting deal. You also have these 2 fairly large and well-known private equity firms coming in. As you pointed out, it's not the first time that they've had private equity interest. General Atlantic invested in 2018. They will retain a stake. And this is a company that also in the next few years might consider an IPO here as well. So want to keep an eye.
Yes, definitely want to keep an eye. But what does it tell you about the ability for some of these homegrown UAE companies to attract international investor interest from PE firms?
Yeah, I mean, it's a sign that they're maturing, that this market is obviously increasing, and not only the real estate market, but obviously the real estate market is a good example. We've seen the influx of these millionaires. That with it brings more banks and financial firms setting up here. You have more opportunities for these companies to grow. Property Finder itself is expanding in the region, and that in itself is then attracting these big players from abroad.
But what are the main segments that PE firms have been looking at over here in the region?
Lots of consumer-driven companies, obviously. I think the other thing to note with private equity is that they've always been here in the region for many years, but what we're seeing is a shift from them regarding this region as a source of capital and to extract capital from, as a place to deploy more and more. We've seen that last year with the GEMS education deal, so that was education again, consumer-driven, all a play on Dubai continuing to grow, and perhaps also Dubai getting past this boom and bust reputation, especially again in the real estate sector.
Is there increasing competition between the homegrown PE firms, like the PE firms from the region, versus the international firms who have started to take note?
They're here, but I don't think they have the same firepower as a foreign firm. So it's clear that also with this deal, that the Brookfields and the CVCs certainly have an advantage vis-a-vis the local PE firms. So we're going to see more of these in the near future, for sure.
So interesting. Nicolas, thank you so much for bringing the story to us. That was Bloomberg's Nicolas Parisi. Now for a look at some of the other stories we're following today. Revolut is planning to launch its services in the UAE after securing initial approval from the country's central bank. The fintech behemoth now plans to ramp up its hiring efforts in the country over the coming months. Bloomberg has learned Revolut plans to continue expanding across the Gulf and is considering applying for a license in Saudi Arabia as its next move. And Saudi Arabia's gourmet food producer and restaurant chain Batil International is exploring an IPO. Bloomberg has learned that the company is working with Morgan Stanley on a potential listing in Riyadh. Batil has approached local lenders about roles in the transaction, and discussions are at an early stage. Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund plans to unveil a new long-term strategy to boost investment returns and drive efforts to diversify away from oil. PIF Governor Yasir Al-Rumayyan says the fund will prioritize domestic investments to create jobs, build new sectors, and expand local sourcing. The fund will also seek co-investments with global partners that channel money back into Saudi Arabia. Coming up, Africa's biggest climate resilience program is looking to the private sector to fill the gap left by Western nations as they slash funding. Details next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Jumana Bersachi in Dubai. Well, South Africa is on the verge of appointing a new ambassador to the United States. President Cyril Ramaphosa says the new envoy will know the American market extremely well. The post has been vacant since March, during which President Donald Trump has criticized Pretoria's black empowerment and foreign policies and imposed punitive tariffs on its imports. Nigeria says it has no plans to revive its dormant fuel tax. Finance Minister Wale Edun says the government won't impose the 5% levy on gasoline and diesel when new tax laws take effect in January. He said no order is being prepared given soaring inflation and the public's economic strain. And Africa's biggest climate resilience initiative is doubling down on its ambitions despite waning support from traditional donors. The Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program is widening its focus and plans to work with private companies to boost funding. The European Commission's Teresa Ribera recently highlighted the importance of strategic partnerships on climate action.
It is particularly important right now when there may be others that feel the temptation to break alliance partnerships to build on their own in an isolated manner, or to challenge the multilateral system or the basis of cooperation.
For more, Bloomberg's Ondiro Gangan joins us now from Kigali, Rwanda. Ondiro, the world increasingly with the Trump administration has taken on varied approaches to tackling climate change, various speeds. Where does the African continent stand in all of this?
Hi, Jumana. They're caught in a limbo where most of the international partners are scaling back on aid. You mentioned President Donald Trump. The U.S. has always been a very significant partner to Africa when it comes to climate change financing, but we've also seen them take a big step back, particularly with the demise of USAID. 98% of programs that were supporting climate change on the African continent disappeared. And it's not just the US, Europe and some European nations have expressed interest also in scaling back their support for climate change programs on the African continent. And you have the Africa Adaptation and Acceleration Program saying that the UK and also the Netherlands have told them that they'll not be supporting the program, and now they have to rely on countries like Norway, Denmark, and the Gates Foundation. And this impact is beginning to unfold. If you look at funding from overseas in 2023, it was $213 billion. In 2024, $198 billion. And it's expected to keep going down. And that's why the continent will be casting wider its net. It will look at alternative markets, China, Japan, Middle East, but also tap into the private sector. If you look at funding flowing into the private sector for climate change, particularly in markets like Asia, 38%, in Africa, just a very dismal 6%, and that presents a window of opportunity. Also, financial institutions will be dipping their toe, but this will be in line with green energy. You have Africa Development Bank, Afri-Exim, EcoBank pledging to raise $100 billion to go into green investment, because again, on the continent, only 3% of that investment comes here. The continent holds 60% potential in terms of wind, solar, geothermal. So the continent is beginning to realize that homegrown solutions are the way forward.
Yeah, and at the same time, you see increasing impact of climate change on Africa with floods, with droughts. Where is that showing up the most, Ondiro?
Jumana, we are beginning to see significant increase on the impact on infrastructure. For example, if you look at the annual loss of climate change to infrastructure, $12.7 billion, and this impact is expected to increase by 27%. Some of the countries that have been heavily affected include Nigeria, South Africa, Algeria, and this impact on smaller economies is even, once you take a country like Lesotho, about 1.5% of their GDP. And also you look at just traditional sectors like agriculture, heavily impacted. You had the president of Somalia saying one of the worst droughts in the country has affected half of the population. And it's not just in East Africa. Down in South Africa, Zambia had to declare a national state of emergency due to drought. So these are some of the issues that came up during the Africa Climate Summit. And what they're talking about is the Nairobi Summit was the first one, and they made declarations. Now with this Addis Summit, they want to start seeing tangible steps that takes them a little bit closer to not only mitigating, but also adapting to climate change.
Bloomberg's Ondiro Aganga in Kigali, Rwanda. Thank you so much. Well, rounding up the show, and just a reminder, recap of our top story today, Israel launched an unprecedented attack on Doha, targeting key Hamas officials, including the chief negotiator, Khalil al-Hayya. Per the latest reports from Hamas quoted in Al Jazeera, Khalil al-Hayya was not actually successfully assassinated, but 5 others were, including a Qatari security official as well. The condemnation has come through very strong from the Qatari PM and from other UAE nations as well as Saudi Arabia, all of the Arab states in the region expressing their solidarity with Qatar. But one of the major questions here is what knock-on effect this is going to have for the ceasefire process, and whether at this point there can be any progress to speak of in terms of getting that proposal across the line. Here's a look at market futures. U.S. futures leaning towards the green, European markets as well up 0.2%. That's it for Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Johanna Bersacci in Dubai. Stay with us for Daybreak Europe. This is Bloomberg.